Hello and welcome. After years of bitterness and talk of military solutions, it seems that relations between Washington and Tehran may be getting better. But will this new diplomacy be given a chance to work? US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton says her country is pursuing a two-track process with Iran, both engagement and confrontation. If diplomacy fails, she says the Obama administration will start imposing, in her words, crippling sanctions on Iran. She was in Moscow today to see how far Russia would be willing to go with Western countries. Earlier this month, Iranian and American negotiators met for their first face-to-face encounter on the nuclear issue. Those talks are expected to lead to further meetings. So today we ask, are US-Iranian relations improving? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send them in by email, SMS, and we also welcome your phone calls on this show. I'm joined today by Roger Cohen, a columnist for the New York Times who spent his summer in Iran covering the very controversial election of June 12th. He joins us from New York, and from Newton, Massachusetts, we have Kaveh Afrasiabi, a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiating team and a former professor of political science at Tehran University. He is the author of Iran's nuclear program, Debating Facts versus Fiction. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Well, let's start with the news of the day, and that is Hillary Clinton's visit to Moscow. She's been talking about Iran's nuclear program, as we mentioned earlier, with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Now, he came out afterwards and he said he believes the threat of harsh sanctions against Iran would be counterproductive and diplomacy needs to be given a chance. Let's listen to what Hillary Clinton had to say after that meeting.
We believe that Iran is entitled to peaceful nuclear energy, but that it is not entitled to nuclear weapons. Russia agrees with us on that. At the same time that we are very vigorously pursuing this track, we are aware that we might not be as successful as we need to be. So we have always looked at the potential of sanctions in the event that we are not successful.
Roger Cohen, let me start with you. Does the statement by Sergei Lavrov that the threat of harsh sanctions would be counterproductive weaken the U.S. position?
Well, it certainly doesn't strengthen it. I'm very pleased that negotiations, albeit tentative, are underway between Iran and the United States. I've argued for that pretty much throughout the year. The two countries are starting from a pretty low base. This is a psychotic relationship. For 30 years, there's basically been no communication whatsoever. And I think they have to move forward slowly, steadily, with gestures on both sides. I myself, in fact, agree with the Russian foreign minister. I don't think sanctions would serve any purpose. I think Iran at this point, after living with sanctions for so many years, is inured to sanctions. It has a very effective conduit through Dubai for goods to come in. They pay a slight surtax. I don't think sanctions would work because I don't think Russia and China would ever come fully on board. And I don't think sanctions are the right way to go because, in effect, they put Tehran on the defensive. And if you have Tehran on the defensive, you're not going to get the reactions from it that you want.
Kaveh Afrasiabi, do you think Tehran will be taking a great deal of comfort from this latest statement by the Russian foreign minister?
I think so, and it's only logical to think that the Iranians are not welcoming any language of coercion, of pressure, of further sanctions, etc., particularly at this critical moment when they've shown a great deal of flexibility by acceding to the US's demand to talk about the nuclear issue at the Geneva talk and opening themselves up for further meaningful dialogue, both bilateral as well as multilateral. And you mentioned a minute ago that there's a talk planned for October 19th for inspection by the IAEA of the Iranian enrichment site in near the city of Qom, as well as the Iranian request for further enrichment of its low-enriched uranium for its research reactor in Tehran. So, we are at a very critical juncture, and it's very important for the U.S. to follow Russia's advice of setting aside this very unattractive, unpleasant language of coercion and threats, which really doesn't sit well with Tehran.
Do you believe that Iran will give the UN inspectors unfettered access to that site?
I think so, and Mr. Mohammad El-Baradei, the outgoing chief of IAEA, had a very productive meeting in Tehran a couple of weeks ago, and he rightly stated that we are shifting gears from confrontation to cooperation. And I would sure hope that the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton would also echo that kind of sentiment instead of seeing this kind of bifurcated approach by Washington, pushing the arc of dialogue and diplomacy on the one hand and of confrontation and threats on the other. And the mistake on the part of Clinton and other U.S. officials is that they think that these two complement each other when in fact they do not. They contradict and cancel each other.
Well, let's go to Roger Cohen. Roger Cohen, we heard there that the Iranians are moving from confrontation to cooperation. We also heard that the Iranians are being more flexible. Do you believe they are?
I think so at this moment, but remember, we've had moments of cooperation before, notably on Afghanistan after 9/11, and then President Bush consigned Iran to the axis of evil, and that was the end of that particular opening. And over these past 30 years, there have been moments of détente or seeming détente between the two countries, and then they've been washed away. I think that after the June 12 election, with the wave of protests that there's been in Iran, that President Ahmadinejad and the government do see potentially in a guarded opening toward the United States a means to offset the protests and unpopularity at home. Remember, the vast majority of Iranians, and in this Iran is unlike other Middle Eastern countries, the vast majority of Iranians, probably in excess of 70%, are very favorable to the United States. And so anybody who does achieve normalization with the US, anybody who gets us to a point where there's once again a US embassy in Tehran and once again an Iranian embassy in Washington, is going to be very, very popular at home. So I do think the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, and President Ahmadinejad and those around them are at a moment in Iran's political evolution where they're prepared to look seriously at a possible opening toward the US. And it's interesting that the Iranian discourse has shifted. The arch enemy right now in most of the pronouncements is not the United States, but Europeans, particularly President Sarkozy of France. So I think this shift is another indication that there is some degree of openness, the idea of a significant improvement in relations with the US. And for that, it's essential that not only these multilateral P5+1 so-called talks take place, but that a bilateral US-Iranian channel is established as soon as possible. There is no way, given the vast burden of misunderstandings that have accumulated over the past 30 years, that we're going to get beyond this, which is in the interest of Iran, in the interest of the United States, in the interest of the world, without talking to each other across a table.
Well, the big issue seems to be Iranian intentions. You've reported extensively on this. You've written that, and I'm quoting here, only creative diplomacy can head off the onrushing Iranian uranium enrichment. Do you believe that Iran is pursuing, as some are saying, nuclear enrichment for civilian purposes or nuclear enrichment for nuclear weapon purposes?
Well, I think that Iran is playing on nuclear ambiguity. And it should be noted that it's not the first to play on nuclear ambiguity in the Middle East. And my sense is that Iran looks out. It sees a nuclear-armed Israel to the west. It sees nuclear-armed Pakistan and India to the east. It sees nuclear-armed Russia to the north. Remember that Iran has been attacked in recent memory with weapons of mass destruction. It was gassed during the Iran-Iraq war with chemical weapons provided to Saddam Hussein in Iraq by the West. And what is the alpha and omega of the Iranian regime? It is survival. Ayatollah Khamenei is the guardian of the revolution, the guardian of the revolution. Iran is a proud country. I think it's proud of its technological achievements. And I think it wants to give itself the option. It wants to put itself at a point somewhere close to where Brazil and Japan are, where it has what's called breakout capacity, that it could accelerate and move toward a military nuclear program very fast. I don't think, and US intelligence doesn't think, that Iran has in fact made that decision. And there are two schools. There's one school, perhaps most closely identified with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, which is that Iran, in his words, is a messianic apocalyptical cult. I don't believe that. I think if you look at the record, in fact, the reason the revolution has survived 30 years is because the rulers of Iran, in the final instance, are pretty prudent. Do you ever hear Iran speaking out about the Chechenian Muslims or about the Uyghur Muslims of China? No, because its alliance with China and Russia is important. And there are many other examples of this. And Iran knows that if it actually builds a nuclear weapon, let alone threatens Israel directly with it, then it places the survival of the Islamic Republic in doubt. And I believe that Iran's rulers would have very serious hesitations about doing that. After all, they've been pursuing on and off nuclear weapons for about 4 decades, 40 years. When Pakistan made a decision to go for a nuclear bomb, it moved from 0 to a bomb in 10 years. That is not the case with Iran. Why? Because there is some degree of hesitation.
Okay, we are going to have to take a short break right now. More of our discussion on US-Iranian relations in just a moment. Stay with us. I'll be back in a moment.